If you live in a major U.S. city, there's a pretty good chance you've seen a big spike in the number of homeless people in your area. Because of drug use, mental illness, and a high cost of living, there's more homeless people in this country now than ever. All over this country, we now have huge first world slums. And that's despite the fact that way more money is being spent to address the crisis. At this point, all the money spent's making the problem worse. In this video, we're going to compare how liberal and conservative states treat their homeless problems. Republicans criticize the liberal approach to homelessness. They say the homeless spike in liberal cities is a manufactured crisis. But is that true? Well, we have the data that we can look at to see. And all that data shows that homelessness is way more prevalent in states that are led by Democrats. In states that are traditionally conservative, there have been large drops in homeless populations. 80% of our nation's homeless live in blue states, and that number's going up every year. That's because there's too many carrots and not enough sticks. In this video, we're going to talk about the states with the highest number of homeless people, and we're going to see which states are liberal and which states are conservative. And I think we're going to find that most are liberal states, and you could make an argument that these liberal states are making the problem even worse. Although, I have to say there are government agencies and nonprofits that are doing a good thing, and we're grateful for that. But overall, as a group, their motivations are suspicious. Let's get started. We begin our look at the states with the highest homeless populations here in Vermont. Now, there aren't that many people in Vermont that are homeless. By last count, it's under 1,700 people. But per capita, 0.3% of Vermont's population is homeless, which is good enough for the top 10. Vermont's a very liberal state that's traditionally helped its homeless population with motel rooms. It's estimated Vermont spends $200,000 every day housing its unsheltered. Vermont also has loose drug laws, and as a result, there's been a huge increase in the number of drug addicts here too. Now we're going to see much higher numbers as we get to states later in the video, and there's states that are doing far more than Vermont is to create an environment that makes it easy to be homeless. But before we get too far, let's look at the states with the least number of homeless people. They are as follows. Only one of these states could be considered a very blue state. The rest are either very conservative or are purple states. Colorado's a new member of the liberal crowd, and as its states become more and more liberal, its homeless population has also increased. Is there a connection? Yes, there is. You can see on this graph when marijuana became legal. Previous to that, Colorado had seen a big drop in homelessness. But after weed became recreational legal, the homeless numbers went back up again. Denver's getting really bad. Some estimates say the number of people on the streets has tripled here. Many have never made more than $25,000 a year in their lives, and many are on drugs. Some are hiding from the law or dodging child support payments. And the city of Denver just deals with it. They'll fence in new encampments and clean up the trash and the poop, just like you would a child. Look at this. In just Denver alone, they spent $480 million on assisting the homeless, but the state of Colorado only spent $324 million on public safety. So this is interesting. This is our first conservative state. Here in Alaska, there's about 2,000 homeless people, which makes up about 0.3% of the state's total population. Alaska also only has 0.4% of the nation's total homeless population. That's a drop in the bucket. But again, as a percentage of its total population, there's more homeless people in Alaska than in Colorado. So why aren't we talking about a lot of conservative states in this video? That's because conservative states spend less of their resources on social services, and these states are more likely to criminalize property crimes associated with homelessness. Rampant drug use and robberies used to support drug habits aren't allowed as often in conservative states. These states don't have a system in place to give drugs to people or provide safe injection sites. They're just less sympathetic. Therefore, the homeless are just less likely to move to red states. They go to states where they're pandered and catered to. And yes, it is true that red states ship their homeless to blue states. An example is what's happening here in Alaska. Often Alaska doesn't have the resources to help with mental illness or drug addiction, so they send their people to nearby Seattle, which does. So red states make it harder to be homeless, and blue states make it easy to be homeless. They just leave them alone. But leaving them alone is making the problem really bad. Even bleeding heart liberals in major metros are getting frustrated with all the crime and blight that comes with homeless camps spilling into nice neighborhoods. Here in Nevada, there's about 7,000 homeless people, and almost every single one of them is either in Vegas or in Reno. And although just over 1% of our nation's homeless population lives in Nevada, it's still 7th highest for percentage of its state's population. 1 in every 400 residents here is homeless, and that number's going up weekly. Just like Colorado, Nevada's relatively new to the liberal game. Going back to the 1940s, there were only a handful of elections where Nevada didn't vote Democrat. You can see here on this chart that right around the time when Nevada turned blue, the homeless population shot up. All the new people moving to Nevada from Southern California are driving up the cost of living here, so that's part of the problem. But many of those living on the streets here are drug addicts or alcoholics. You might not even see many of the homeless here because a lot of them live underground in tunnels, which serve as sewers and flood control channels. Wages aren't keeping up with the rising cost of living here in Las Vegas, just like they aren't across the nation. So rather than figure out a plan, many people drop out of society for good. And the question's always asked, why not take the billions we spend overseas and use it to train all these people? We need truck drivers, electricians, roofers, cooks, teachers, nurses. Well, I'd bet many of the people on the streets aren't capable of work or wouldn't want to get back to work. Why try when you're given everything you need? A safe place to consume drugs and live free of responsibility. 3% of all homeless people in the U.S. come from the state of Massachusetts, and 1 in 400 people in the state doesn't have a home. The number of homeless here has increased by 10% in the last few years. Massachusetts is arguably the most liberal state of all when you measure voting patterns for the last 50 years. Now, this is one of only 3 states on this list that can be considered a cold weather state. That makes sense. Who wants to be on the streets when it's cold? Because of the extreme weather, a lot of the homeless in this state live in shelters paid for by the taxpayers. And part of the problem in Massachusetts is the high cost of living. It's really expensive here, as it is in most other blue states. Red states are more likely to be far cheaper and more rural, so people can find shelter easier. You might be shocked to hear that the state of Washington only has the nation's 5th highest number of homeless people per capita, but it's true. The number of homeless in this state is approaching 25,000 people, and it's estimated half are here in Seattle. However, ask people who live in nearby Tacoma and Olympia. It's grown a lot there too. It's been since the 1980s that this was a conservative state, and Seattle is a progressive paradise. It has giant slums where drug use is allowed and property crimes are ignored, where people do exactly what they want without the police breathing down their necks. Seattle is where the liberal elites cower in fear of the have-nots. It's really easy to be homeless in Seattle. 3 free meals, free clothes, free transit, free drugs. Word's out about how generous the state of Washington is. We mentioned how other states like Alaska ship their homeless here for drug rehab, only to have most of them drop out and join the ranks out here on the sidewalks or in the trees. Yes, the homeless people in Seattle are now building tree houses. What country is this in? Seattle's solutions to spend more money on the problem. The city buys up really expensive apartment units and then turns them over to the homeless for housing. Seattle used some of its federal COVID relief money on $50 million in apartments for only 165 homeless people. That's $300,000 per homeless people if you're counting. You think that's bad? Los Angeles spent $160 million on a building to stick its homeless in. That one investment alone means LA spent $600,000 per homeless person to live in a nice new modern room. Many of them are drug addicts, by the way. That doesn't seem fair to small businesses and hardworking people who have to scrap together a living without any help, does it? So if you're homeless, wouldn't you rather move to a city that uses tax money to provide overpriced condos for drug users? Places like Seattle are funneling tons of money towards the most unproductive members of society. And that is a shame. Nearby Oregon has a crisis on its hands too. Portland's the biggest example of this, although Eugene and Medford have a high number of people on their streets too. They feel the city is spending way too much money on solving its homeless problem, only to see it get worse. It's so bad here that even liberals in Portland say enough's enough. Last year, it was announced that Multnomah County would spend $1 billion on homeless services. Like many other liberal states, Oregon has a bunch of group homes, food pantries, free lunch programs, sheltered workshops, free medical clinics, homeless shelters, neighborhood centers, mental health services, transitional housing, employment services, affordable housing laws, and jail reform. All of that, and the problem is just getting worse. Plus, a lot of homeless people say they can't even access those services or that they're ineffective. Is it compassionate to allow these people to sink into an abyss of alcoholism, drug abuse, and subhuman dysfunction? Is it compassionate to allow them to commit crimes to support their drug habits? Anything goes in Portland. Homeless junkies steal to get high, and they're allowed to camp wherever they want, and they take residential neighborhoods hostage. And as Portland spends hundreds of millions to keep its homeless happy, it voted to cut $25 million from its police budget. Remember that. New York, really? You don't hear about the huge homeless problem here like you do in other states on the West Coast. That's because, unlike in California, most homeless people in this state live indoors. It's just too cold to camp out here, and pitching tents in downtown New York City isn't really a thing. In a city of more than 8 million people, nearly 1 of every 100 New Yorkers is homeless. That's 80,000 men, women, and children. Thousands sleep in the subways and on sidewalks every night, but most of them are sheltered inside. That's because the city has a right to shelter law, which means that the city has to provide emergency shelter to anybody that needs it. And as a result, New York City spends more than $3 billion a year to put people up in hotels and in shelters. And that number's doubled in the last 5 years. But yet, New York's homeless population is now higher than it's been since the Great Depression. It's definitely a cost of living thing here in New York City. And while nobody wants kids or people trying to climb out of a bad spot to live outdoors, the reality is that many of the homeless here have mental issues or addictions, and they're being catered to. What does New York City do to help its addicts? It provides supervised drug use facilities. Places where you can show up and inject drugs in a safe environment. Sounds like that in New York City, it's easier to be a drug addict than a working member of society. You think that would fly in Alabama or Nebraska or Montana? There's crazy homeless people roaming the streets here, assaulting hardworking Americans. And since they don't prosecute theft enough, homeless people just walk in and steal whatever they want. Retail theft in New York City is up 15% in the last year alone. You get what you pay for. New York spent more money giving homeless people shelter than it did on its entire university system. No wonder the state has the third highest rate of people moving away for good, right?
It actually costs more money to give homeless services to a homeless person than to pay their rent.
Believe it or don't, but Hawaii has a huge homeless problem. There's only 7,000 or so homeless people here, but it makes up the second highest rate of homelessness in the nation. Here, it's drugs and poverty mostly. It's really expensive to live here, and there's really nowhere to go. Poor people can't afford a plane ticket to leave paradise for a cheaper life. And as you may know, Hawaii's been a blue state ever since it became a state in 1959. Now, who do you think tops this list? 28% of all homeless people in the nation live in California. The number of homeless people in California is 161,548. Nope, 161,550. No, 161,555. You get the point. Nearly 1 in every 200 people in California lives on the streets or in their cars or in a short-term motel. The homeless population here has increased by 20% in the last 2 years alone. It's everywhere here. Stockton, Fresno, San Francisco, Los Angeles. Oakland might have it the worst. This place looks like a third world country. In California, if you're homeless, you get more rights than the average citizen. You can steal, you can do drugs, you can live wherever you want, you can even poop wherever you want. Los Angeles County spent billions fighting homelessness, but it's increased 15% in the last year alone. Again, you get what you pay for. Spend more money on homeless, and you get more homeless. California doesn't have fewer homeless, just better funded homeless. Meanwhile, the place looks like shit. Police budgets in California are being cut. Hardworking families are terrorized by people who get free housing and free money. The same people endangering the rest of us enjoy more benefits and freedoms than we do. What the hell? It's so progressive and woke in California that everybody who's homeless considers moving here. Why not? California's put out a big welcome mat for all who want to live a life like this. And now, the sensible people are moving away from California in record numbers. They don't want to be here anymore. Can you blame them? Okay, so as we saw, all but one of the states with the highest homeless populations are liberal states. Is it going to remain that way? Probably. Most of these states have policies that almost encourage homelessness. Now, what would happen if all 70,000 homeless people in LA County camped out in nice residential areas like this? Would that change things? What if they camped out in the neighborhoods where California's elected leaders live? Would that change things? Probably not. It's not their problem. Some people say liberal cities make money on homelessness and they don't want to solve the problem. But that's another topic for another video. Okay, with all that bad stuff, let's talk about something good. As you know, many of our veterans are homeless, and that's just terrible. I wanted to draw your attention to a GoFundMe I heard about. A young Florida student's raising money to help homeless veterans, and I thought maybe some of us could chip in. Too bad more of us don't have a heart as big as hers. The link to her GoFundMe is in the description. You know what to do. Let's help her out, folks. Hey, Johnny, tell me, what is the problem with homelessness in this country? How do we fix this problem?
I don't know that, first of all, I don't know that we can ever completely fix it, but I think we can ameliorate, we can make it better. And I think we need to work a strategy that involves improving the economy, addressing the root issues of homelessness, a better education for people who are not considered homeless. People need to understand each other. Did you get that?
Yeah, I'm listening.
Well, here's an example of what I'm saying. When people have a stereotype of homelessness as somebody that might be sleeping in the front of in the storefront of, or on a bus stop or something, but there's all kinds of so-called homelessness. And then when we're focusing on people who don't have a roof over their heads, there are a lot of people that need social services they actually live in a house, but the house may be so dilapidated or the family might be so dysfunctional that for all extents and purposes, they're kind of homeless.
Yeah, no, I'm listening. Yeah, so
the problem is partly with the language that we use to perceive homelessness. Like, what does it really mean to be homeless? And so we need to look at everything. We need to look at our perceptions. We need to look at the language. We need to look at public policy, including economic policy, criminal justice. There are people that part of the reason they're homeless is they've made some bad decisions and maybe they fell through the cracks on the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I get you. The more I've been researching the homeless problem, it kind of looks like some cities almost encourage homelessness to a certain point.
Oh, yes.
Can you talk about that?
Well, something that I'm looking at now is not just the city, not just the municipality, but in many cases, what I see is municipalities not wanting to address the issue, like it's not important enough. But here's something that a lot of people don't catch. Some of the charities, they perpetuate homelessness because they want to get funding. So they do things that keep people there for a period of time. They're causing a dependency. So the people that are there on a regular basis, they're going to the Bible study so they can get the services like hot lunch and shower and laundry. But then you've used up a good 6-8 hours, or at least 4 hours. And that's time you could use to go get a job.
Mm-hmm. So are you saying city agencies make it more difficult for homeless people than it needs to be?
Well, that's not even a city agency. That's a church shelter, which the city, so that the taxpayers don't have to pay anything, they turn to the churches, but then some of the churches, they're perpetuating a cycle of dependency.
So how do cities make it more difficult or how do cities encourage homelessness or almost benefit from it?
I look at it in the metaphor of like, if you're trying to get rid of the roaches in a building, so you turn the light on and maybe you treat part of the house. Well, the roaches go somewhere else. Now, I know that sounds kind of barbaric to compare homeless people to roaches, but there are a lot of people. We are kind of the unwanted. We're the ugly ones, the defective, the broken people. So some cities, they have the police just get them out of the way. Move on. You can't stay here. No, you can't sleep here. So where do you go? So the homeless people go somewhere else. Well, then they become a burden to wherever they're at, whether that's a neighborhood or a warehouse district or, sleeping under an overpass or something. You can't just sweep people out like they're unwanted filth.
Yeah, I get you on that. How do you feel about certain cities that are giving people drugs, giving them injection sites, kind of encouraging drug use among the homeless population?
No, I don't. You mean, are you referring to methadone, like substitution? Are you referring to that?
There's that. There's also safe injection sites where they provide needles and heroin and opiates, and they give people drugs.
That's not a problem to me. That's not encouraging drug use. Addiction is a very, very complicated issue, and we could probably talk about that like for days. But to me, one of the more important causes of drug use is people are trying to numb the pain. So why are they hurting? In other words, let's look at opioid addiction with the middle class. So why are all these people taking painkillers? What are we doing wrong that so many people are in pain? That's address the root causes.
Yeah. So you mean numb the pain, like they're depressed because they're homeless, they're taking drugs or drinking booze to kind of get through it?
Yeah. And it's not just I'm depressed because I'm homeless. I mean, not me in particular, but like say any one person. There's a whole range of problems they could be trying to avoid. And that's maybe one thing that cities need to do is have more rehab programs, and not this kind of private rehab where they get you out in a number of weeks and they're almost calculating that you're going to fail. So it's just a scam. Now, that's not the city or the municipality. That's the insurance industry and the rehab, some of the rehab. Now, I'm not saying all the rehab is like that, but there's actually people that make money on homelessness.
Yeah. Can you give me an example of what you mean?
Well, I was referring to some of these nonprofits that are like religious organizations. They get funding and donations. They get funding even from cities. Municipalities, government will say, well, we're going to let this, church so-and-so deal with this problem, because then it saves taxpayer money. Well, whether the city gives them funding or not, or allows them a space in a neighborhood, some of these shelters are nonprofits. In order to exist, they encourage homeless people to stay around instead of helping them to actually get out and get a job and get a life, get a housing. They're encouraging people to keep coming so they can have the numbers on the book. They have sign-in sheets. The sign-in sheets to justify, oh yeah, this is why you should donate to this charity because we have so many people who have so many needs. But they're not really addressing the needs. They're just creating dependency.
Hey, 100% agree with you on that. I tried to get some nonprofits. I was doing a thing on the Bay Area, San Francisco, Oakland. I tried to get a bunch of nonprofits to get back to me. And I didn't even have an agenda. I just wanted to ask them how they felt about the homeless problem in general and what we could do to fix it. Most of them ignored me. The ones that got back to me said they weren't going to talk to me. And I was like, what do you have to hide? But clearly there's a lot to hide. I think that the city is partially to blame for encouraging homelessness to an extent that they provide them so many resources that they'll create dependency, like what you're saying, and then the nonprofits get a free pass for
Right.
for the stuff that they do when they're actually part of the problem too. I agree with you, man. They don't want to solve.
Right.
It's like the March of Dimes. They don't want to solve polio, because if you solve polio, then you're out of jobs, right? Hey, in all your interactions with the being homeless and the people that you've talked to and met throughout the years, what percentage of the current homeless people, the people that you've met, would you estimate are currently trying to get back on their feet? And what percentage have given up and are just going to be homeless and take advantage of all the handouts?
It's hard to say, but there are a lot more people really trying than people would assume, but it's just very, very frustrating. For example, I sell scrap metal, but if I go out and I'm selling scrap metal, then I'm denied a hot lunch because I missed the Bible study. Well, I mean, I'm trying to be honest and get an honest living, but I get penalized because I'm out trying to do something for myself. So, there's a lot of frustrations, and there are a lot of people trying, but maybe they need to be educated as to how to be more effective in getting out of it. Being homeless is like being in a huge chasm with slippery sides. It's hard to get out of it.
Yeah, I get you. And I agree with you on the rules. I mean, the shelters and churches and nonprofits need to have rules. They need to say you can't drink and you can't take drugs and you have to be in. There's a curfew, so you can't wander in here at midnight. But at the same time, it kind of makes it a lot harder for people to go out and get a job or get their life in order and then get back at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever the time is to meet the curfew. Right. So it kind of makes it difficult for people to follow the rules. You got to have rules, but some of the rules.
No, I'm all for rules. I was in the Army 9 years. I'm all for discipline, but there should be a balance. Rules are meant to solve problems, so we need to think outside the box and not just be in love with rules for rules' sake.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What's a typical day for you like? You get up in the morning until you go to bed?
Oh, that's a good one. That brings up a question for me. I don't want to avoid the question, but you got to have a routine if you're going to maintain sanity and a good, productive life. So what I try to do is, first thing, I have to get out, get up, and get moving and do something. Even if I feel bad or depressed or tired, I'm like, I got to get up and start. Even if it's just take a walk and clean and pick up cigarette butts or something, do something to get the blood flowing. And once I do that, I usually find that I start to get effective. And then, my routine is I pick up the trash in the neighborhood, and that's to be thankful for, the good that others do for me. And as I pick up the trash, I separate out the metal and anything I can sell, and I sort it later on. So I can sort it in the building in which I'm squatting, and I've turned it into like a little cottage industry. And I have a pickup truck that I got when my father died. I used some of the money to buy this pickup truck, and I use that to haul scrap metal and sell it.
Okay. And you do that all day, and then when it's time to get back to the church or wherever you're staying, you got to get there before they let you.
I don't necessarily. Lately, for the last few years, I try to avoid the overnighters because of the bullies and the psychopaths. And I'm lucky enough to have a roof over my head, that I choose to do that, even if it's kind of cold or like the toilets are not working. I'm safer than if I have to go in and risk being. Now, I'm not afraid of the bullies, but if I get in a fight with one and then I go to jail, my truck could get towed. And then the newspaper would say, well, John Creighton beat up a homeless person or whatever. No. So it's not worth it to me to get in a fight with someone who's mentally ill or bent on causing trouble. Mm-hmm. So no, I'll finish my work day and I'll go get a meal at a church, but I don't hang around. I don't want to hang around and where trouble could. I try to minimize opportunities for trouble.
And by trouble, you mean groups of homeless or drug users that congregate in areas that.
No, it's not. It's not necessarily the drug users. There's people that have behavioral problems, and it may have nothing to do with drugs.
Yeah.
It may be that they had a dysfunctional family situation.
Yeah.
It's like the adage: a few bad apples will spoil the barrel.
Yeah. What percentage of people that are on the streets, in your experience, do you think are mentally ill?
Well, how do you define mental illness? I mean, just being on the streets makes you depressed, and some people would say depression is a mental illness. Well, I mean, everybody in the world, even your so-called normals, everyone gets sad once in a while. So I don't know how to answer that. I mean, I'm not a statistician. I'm not a social psychologist or a sociologist. I don't know. Like, and then like some mental illnesses are more serious than others. You know, if they're untreated and the person is also using drugs, then that's called mental illness substance abuse, MISA, M-I-S-A. Oh, by the way, I worked 5 years in admin in a Department of Human Services, state of Illinois. So yeah, I've got a little, when I use terminology like that, it's the work experience that I had.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to say what's the percentage. I don't know how to answer that.
That's fine. Yeah, I hear it's a lot, but I was just asking.
Yeah, I mean it is, but it's almost like, is that really the question we should be asking, or should we be asking, how can we improve mental health in America today?
Yeah, I agree. We're a very unhealthy country, whether it's the mental health or the physical health. A lot of us are depressed and overweight and not doing very well upstairs, and
Yeah.
it's sad. I don't know if it's our diet
Yeah.
or what media we're consuming. It's not a very good place we're in right now.
Oh yeah, and then there's actually people that find it fun or entertaining to go harass homeless people. You know, like, let's go beat up on the homeless. Or there are cases in downtown Chicago, the Loop, where people have gone and shot or killed homeless people.
Yeah. So, like, how long have you been homeless for?
Probably 3 months. I was completely caught off guard. So yeah, I was working full time. I was working as a truck driver doing tomatoes, and I had deposits on 2 different apartments. I still do on 2 different apartment complexes, but I'm on a waiting list. In the meantime, what am I gonna do? You know? So I got a job at FedEx as a package handler. Today's my last dental appointment, and then I got to get a set of glasses, and I'm going back to truck driving. And I'll make $2,200 a week. I already got job offers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's my life in a nutshell.
So where are you staying at right now?
It's like for homeless people, sure.
Okay.
Shelter. We got I don't have a roommate, but I have a little one room, 1 bed. I got my own bath.
And you just showed up and said, "Hey man, I don't have a place to stay," and they took you in?
Yeah, they did. There's like 4 or 5 different programs here, and you got to bounce from one to the other. They're all next door to each other, and then, they all ask you, "Where did you sleep last night?" I said, "I slept in my car." And I did. I was sleeping in my car for a month by then, and they said, "Okay." And then, I had to bring my tax records, my bank records, and stuff, and because I do have an income, I have a retirement, believe it or not, and so I had to show, and I was still under the threshold. One program I was not under the threshold. I made too much.
Yeah.
And then one I was qualified. So they called me up. I had to wait. I still had to wait another 2 weeks, and I don't know when they were going to call, but yeah, one phone call. They give you one phone call. You answer it. You answer it. If not, you got to re-register all over. So I answered it, and they said, "Yeah, you come in a couple of days." Boom.
So are you, you're new to the not having a house situation, and it doesn't sound like it's going to be very long. This is very temporary for you. What have you learned about the homeless world in your short time experiencing sudden homelessness, and for you, the type of person that is a very, a smart guy that has a good job, that's never been in this situation before? What have you learned, or what insights have you gained by being in the homeless world for a little bit?
I learned that there is so many programs. I learned that there's so many food banks, distribution places. I knew I learned that it's a whole new world. I mean, there's whole different programs. I was staying at homeless camps in San Joaquin County, Yolo County, and of course, Sacramento County. So they all have their own good points and bad points.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned that there's a whole new world, man. I mean, really, it's just so many different things. And there's people who have been living like this for a long time, and they have no motivation to get out of this situation.
Yeah, that's kind of the angle that I was kind of taking, was the frustration of providing such a wide safety net that you create a dependency where people aren't motivated to get their life in order,
Hunger is the number one motivator in the entire world, period. There's no replacement. You cannot be motivated on a full stomach. So you keep letting people eat, okay, they're not gonna change.
Yeah. I know there's some cities that hand out, drugs and cigarettes and booze and tents and kind of make them as comfortable as possible. And then they're not motivated to get their butts back out there and, stand up on their feet and get going,
This place has urine tests every week, okay? But guess what? They don't care if you have marijuana in your system. So marijuana reduces your motivation. Every marijuana smoker I've ever talked to, they always say, "I'll do it tomorrow."
Yeah, I get you. But yeah, I mean, if you're a homeless stoner, you're probably not going to be as motivated to get your life in order. I agree.
Yeah. So that's another thing I learned. Everything's like, "I'll do it tomorrow. I got a video game to play. I got to smoke some more. I'll do it tomorrow. I'm going to take a nap." I mean, everything's tomorrow. Yeah.
What about the people that you've kind of befriended, or people you've ran into in your short amount of time being homeless? Have you gained an insight into how they're living their lives? And do you see like a way that, do you feel that there's something that they need to do different to get their lives in order?
There's a lot of great guys, but it's the drugs. It's whether it's meth or marijuana or heroin. I mean, it's the drugs, period. They don't allow alcohol drinking in this building, but they allow marijuana smoking in the building. What's that? Oh, it's legal. Well, you know what? Whatever. They're not going to move. So it's like there's an incentive for the program managers to keep people here.
Yeah. I've heard that from a couple people. It's like some of these nonprofits and city agencies are almost motivated to keep the numbers up and inflated for their homeless population so they can justify the budget that they get every year.
Yeah, exactly. There's no job training here.
Isn't that funny, though, that you would think these agencies and these government agencies and cities and these nonprofits would be motivated to end homelessness, and they spend all this money on it, and it only gets worse, and it doesn't really seem like they even really want to solve it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I lived in Japan for 8 years. Japan has no homeless people. Why? Guess what? They don't have unemployment. They don't have Social Security. They don't have welfare. So from the day one you're born, you're trained to realize you got to rely on yourself, period. There's no camps, and there's no fucking 3-ply upper class homeless, cardboard boxes, along all over everywhere, freeways, side streets, whatever.
Yep. Americans are too weak to think for themselves and take care of themselves anymore.
Yeah.
So you moved to Seattle, you lasted 5 years, and then you left.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What was it that was the final straw for you living in Seattle that you were like, let's get the hell out of here and go to Arizona?
So it was a couple different things. One, Seattle is just known for being very gray and rainy. And, I just didn't think I could do another winter there. But the final straw, if you will, was a shooting that took place 50 feet in front of my house.
how has the homeless problem in Seattle just become beyond unmanageable at this point?
Well, I've watched it change during my time there. I mean, I came there in 2014 as a visitor and was trying to find a job out there. Eventually, I did in 2016. And what I saw during my early time there and what I see now is very, very, it's different. The problem has unquestionably gotten worse. There's a lot of finger pointing, blaming, this entity, that entity, this system, that system, this policy, that policy. But there's no one thing I can say, oh yeah, that's the one thing that's causing it. But I can see trends that are making it much worse. In, I think, 2016, 2017, something like that, the city council, if memory serves, decided to change ordinances to allow camping on public property. And I think part of that was it's a lot of these things are well intended, but they have consequences, some of which are predictable, some less so. But that one, too, I think a lot of people was kind of going, okay, we don't have a way to deal with some of these people. We're going to let them stay wherever. But as you can probably extrapolate, it just kind of becomes self-reinforcing, and then these things become bigger, and it's much harder to do something about. So I've seen the problem sadly get worse. And not a lot of real bold action to try to address the root causes of the problem. There's a lot of talk about housing first, and we can kind of delve into some of how that will and won't work. But I've just seen these encampments pop up, the attempts at sweeping them. And there's a valid argument, like it just moves the problem from one place to another. But there's also there are some attempts at outreach. Some people take the help, some don't. The city, I think, tries to take on a lot of the burden itself rather than taking maybe advantage of rather than the county or the state trying to do something more holistically. And that's where I think some of the problems are.
Yeah, I think that the city is encouraging it. They say they want to solve homelessness, but the amount of resources that they provide the people, the homeless folks, whether it's, money or tents or drugs or free reign to do whatever you want, or extended lengths of time of moving or apartments. I know that the city has been buying expensive apartment buildings and then turning them into places where they let the homeless people, live in. I can only imagine what those look like after they move out, if they ever move out. But I'm a firm believer that the nonprofits for sure are motivated to keep the homeless numbers up. They don't want to solve homelessness, because if they did, then they'd put themselves out of work. And certain cities, especially the ones on the West Coast, are just incentivizing homeless folks to come there. I don't think it's a voting thing. There's only 20 or 30,000 people in Washington that are homeless. So that's not going to make much of a difference in an already liberal state. I don't understand why, if it's not to get votes, why they'd be incentivized to keep the homeless numbers up unless they're doing some kind of a backdoor deal with developers where they're like developing, sustainable living communities or temporary housing or whatever, and they need to have more units to put up, and so they're incentivized. I don't buy that either. I don't understand why you would not do your best to solve a problem and only essentially spend money and see a worse outcome. Like, to me, I could do that, and I'm not a city planner or government person or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that's kind of one of the things I had emailed my city council representative. I said, we're spending all this money, but it doesn't feel like it's getting better. Why? And I think you are on to something. The way I've kind of seen it is that the homeless population, I think there's several subgroups there, and there's maybe not enough effort being made to figure out which subgroup some of these people are in, and then address those independently. I mean, drugs are a huge problem. You look at there was I think it was Como. They did a documentary called "Seattle is Dying," and they talk to some of these people, and they say, okay, what percentage of these people have a drug problem? And they all say it's like 90, 100%. You do have people that have mental illness. And I think though a lot of that and the drug use may be intertwined in terms of people are trying to self-medicate or whatever. But there are some other subgroups. There's people that are legitimately just down on their luck, but those are the people that tend to, I think, take the help that's offered to them because they don't want to be in this position. There's also another subgroup that live this way by choice. I don't know what percentage those are. I'm by no means an expert. I'm just a resident now, former resident of Seattle, but I've seen it and talked to different people, kind of followed some of these different groups that are trying to address the problem, and I think that's one of the challenges is figuring out, okay, which group does the individual fit into, and then how do we steer them out of it? And it does feel like the different aid groups and things like that within the city are very scattershot. There's not a lot doesn't feel very unified in terms of how to address it. The city had what they called the navigation team I think it was within the Seattle Police Department. And they would use that to try to steer people to one place or another. They disbanded that. And I did talk to several officers when we were dealing with a homeless person living not too far from where I was. And I said, is there anything we can call? Where can we go? And they're like, we don't know. And
unwilling.
Yeah. And so
they can do they can do things that they want to do. They're unwilling to really do anything. And you're the guy that you saw, or the group in your neighborhood, that's just one of 100 places and little nooks and crannies in Seattle where the same thing's going on.
Yep. Yeah.
They're not incentivizing it, but they are by their inactions.
Correct.
It's almost like a welcome mat.
And I had talked to the police that were there, and they said that my jaw hit the floor. They said, we are not allowed to trespass people from private property if they're in this state.
You mean like if they're already squatting on private property, the police cannot remove them?
Nope. They said all we can do is ask and try to encourage them. And I said, I just thought, wow, what if this was on the mayor's property or whoever? Like where
it'd be removed if it was on the mayor's property.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, if it was there, it would be moved in a heartbeat.
I get you. You guys did a very good job. The police were calm, and you were a citizen and a neighbor and all of this energy and the positive energy and like the enthusiasm to help one person. To me, it's just, you should not have to do that yourself.
No.
And the problem wouldn't even have been there if, in my opinion, if Seattle hadn't have opened up the welcome wagon and said, come all ye druggies and homeless who want a free ride, you can do whatever you want and no one's going to care. Just keep your head down and, cooperate and you can kind of have a free reign. I mean, the fact that your story even happens anymore, it's just crazy. And it's going on around every block in Seattle and all over the West Coast. this one situation that you're talking about is happening all over the place.
But there are a lot of people, a lot of smaller groups, like We Heart Seattle is one of them, that are just saying, hey, we've got to take some of this into our own hands a little bit. We're going to make mistakes. We're not perfect, but we're trying to do the right thing by
Are they a nonprofit, the We Heart Seattle?
Yes. Yes.
So many of the nonprofits, I'm pretty sure, are not motivated to solve the homeless problem. They just want to push people around and collect a paycheck.
There is what some folks have for years called the homeless industrial complex. There's a few players in particular, I'm not going to name names, who I think some feel are kind of grifting a little bit, who are interested in the money that the city's giving out. And they do try to help people, but they're not really, don't feel that they're trying to solve the problem, because if they solved it, they would be out of business. And that's, I think, very, very unfortunate. There are some other, talking about We Heart Seattle, there are some what they call mutual aid groups in the city, who I've interacted with on social media. I think some of them mean well, but they've shown up at, groups like We Heart Seattle where they're trying to do some kind of cleanup, and they get in their face, they film things, they try to say, oh, these people that are trying to go do a cleanup or something, they're terrorists, they're awful people that
they interfere with the cleanups, right?
And they've actually convinced some of the city council that groups like We Heart Seattle might shouldn't get support from the city.
And all they're trying to do is transition people from a tent in a parking lot and maybe take them to a shelter, help them collect their things, and then they move on, right?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't worked with this group, but I have followed them a little bit online. I kind of follow everybody and just kind of see what are they trying to do? What are they doing well? What are they not doing well? And I watch them fight each other, which is really, really sad.
Yeah, the nonprofits are fighting over territory and bragging rights. Do you think, based on when you left and Seattle was in the rearview mirror, did you have a hopeful, optimistic feeling about where you felt Seattle was headed? Or do you think that the homeless and the lawlessness and all the property crimes and the drug use is going to get worse and worse?
If, like I said, the main reason I left was the weather and how it affects my health. But if that was not a factor, would I still be there? Maybe. When I left, was I feeling hopeful that it was going to get better? Not really. Something doesn't work, so they just double down on it, and just more money, or we got to try harder, and somehow the same thing is the same thing that's not working is going to somehow start working, and that's really that's. The facts just don't line up with what people are seeing with their own two eyes.
Hey everyone. So it's pretty clear by now that elected leaders aren't going to help you. If you don't like what you saw in this video, demanding change won't work. You're going to have to do it on your own. If you want to be safe and want your community to be a place where people want to live, you're going to have to clean the place up yourselves. You're going to have to work with your friends and neighbors to lower crime. Politicians clearly don't care as much anymore. It's up to us.
This is Sage, Nick's manager. This has been a Corner House Entertainment production.
Are you looking to move and need advice? I do consulting. That's right. I'll sit down and talk about where the next perfect place for you and your family should be. I do it all the time. Together, let's find you a new home that's safe and checks all your boxes. You can get my email in the description to find out how I can help you find your perfect relocation. And I can also help you find your new house too. Email me and I'll work with you on not just helping you figure out where to move, but I can help you find your perfect home too. That's right. Someone's a realtor now. Who wants to deal with a realtor they don't know when you can have me help you? right?